All right. Welcome, everyone. Tonight is going to be a little bit different than our typical meetup on the plays, because what we're going to do is actually look back at the 7 plays that we have read. And I'm going to share a little bit about some of my thoughts, some of the common themes, just maybe some parallels. We'll discuss that for a bit. And then, obviously I want to hear what you think about it as well. And then we'll switch gears a little bit and talk about what we want to do next. And with that, there'll be a kind of interactive poll of what you guys want to do. And we'll take, your answers into advisement. We'll discuss it with Shrikant and myself, and then we'll figure out kind of the next schedule of the plays. We want to continue this series, obviously depending on your input as well, if there's interest, but we think it's been a really interesting experience. With that, I'm going to share a little table I put together that will make it maybe help you guys jog your memory a little bit. So here it is. Can you see my screen? Joe, can you see my screen?
I can.
Yep. Is this big enough?
I
can make it a little bit bigger.
That'd be helpful.
Is this good?
Yeah, that's perfect, actually.
Okay, so these are the 7 plays that we did. They're kind of in reverse order, starting from the last one and going back to Antigone. What I did is I wrote out kind of the main characters just to help us orient ourselves, because I know a lot of names, and sometimes you remember the character but don't remember the name. So anyway, I wrote out all the names. Tried to kind of keep them in a somewhat logical order. So like the first row will be main character or characters, and then somewhat similar characters, I guess, that play a similar role in the plays are listed kind of in the logical order after that. Obviously, not every play has a parallel, but you can kind of see what's going on if you've read these plays with us or on your own. So I wanted to just go through and maybe talk about some of the themes that have been raised as we read these plays and discussed them. And it's it is interesting to look back on them and see some common threads and common patterns emerge, as well as some of the differences, right? So we started with Antigone. And Antigone, I guess one of the main themes there is the role of individual versus the role of the community or the state. That theme obviously echoes very well with Enemy of the People by Ibsen, where again you have kind of like a lone individual against the community. Somewhat, it is also maybe echoed a little bit in Saint Joan. Saint Joan kind of puts herself, Joan of Arc puts herself in somewhat, not somewhat, but in opposition to the state, to the church. So there's definitely some common themes there that we might want to explore. Going down the list, Othello is obviously all about several themes. One of the main ones being perhaps envy, jealousy, the role of reputation, and the role, and perhaps this idea of some unknown, a revelation of something that was not previously known, and perhaps gullibility. So there's a lot of emphasis on truth and our inability to perhaps know fullness of it, and so kind of the need for some humility, which again, this idea of humility and hubris is obviously another common theme that pretty much, I would say probably in all of these plays has a part, right? In Le Cid, in Don Carlos, Othello, even Antigone, we said that Antigone herself is not necessarily free from fault. She is a little bit arrogant in the way she takes the stand. She doesn't want anyone to share in her role of being a stickler for principle and for tradition and so on. And when her sister tries to join her in some way later, she's really adamant that she does not want to share her place with her. So the role of hubris here is interesting in all of these plays. Then Lycid, very interesting setup. So I would say in some ways it's an outlier. Maybe in other ways it's not. Obviously, we have the concept of honor and the concept of the place of passion and place of feeling versus principle. Obviously, you remember Lycid, Don Rodrigue kind of epitomizes this idea that you need to sacrifice your own feelings for the principle and the honor of the family. Chemin, his beloved, does the same. And so they're kind of locked in this mutual interplay of conflicting feelings and loyalties to being honorable and principled. And in the end, it seems that kind of the nature wins, right? They are allowed to marry and kind of everything ends well when there's sort of a balanced approach to this. So this is very interesting where again, you have this conflict or interplay between passion and principle. Then going down the list, Don Carlos, another, I would say, almost like an outlier in some ways, but then you have other themes that are perhaps echoed here. Particularly what I find interesting is comparing Creon, the king in Antigone, to Philip II, the king of Spain. And then we have Peter, mayor of this town in Enemy of the People. Basically, these people who are in charge of leading their communities, and whether or not you think they fail their communities, or whether you think they actually make for good rulers and are helpful, right? Also in these leading community roles are the Grand Inquisitor. You have the Duke of Venice in Othello, and perhaps you have the archbishops and bishops in St. Joan that play the role of kind of these leaders of a community that essentially decide the fate of the state and the fate of the people under them. Of course, in St. Joan, you also have Charles VII, the Dauphin, the king-to-be that is crowned, thanks to Joan. And he starts playing, or maybe not playing, the role of a leader in his respective realm. So, yeah, very interesting, this interplay of these people who are in charge. In Cyrano de Bergerac, you have Count de Guiche, who probably is not the most admirable character, although he mellows towards the end. It becomes somewhat more appealing towards the end of the play, but he does connive and scheme, and there's not really a lot of positive feedback that we can glean from his role in the play. So this is kind of my overview of the 7 plays, and I want to hear what you guys thought about both the kind of maybe the themes that have been raised, some of the patterns, some of the recurring ideas, but also just the experience of how we went through it and how how whether you enjoyed it, maybe you didn't enjoy certain things. So if you can structure your feedback in this area, just basically sharing some of the common themes, some of the takeaways for you, and also what you thought was great, what you thought was maybe lacking, and then we can, we'll go from there. So if you want to participate, I'm going to stop sharing now. Just go ahead and type in an exclamation mark in the chat, and we'll start going around and hopefully get some good discussion going. Joe, go ahead.
Oh, I'm already unmuted. So when it comes to, I think I liked Antigone actually the most, but something that just occurred to me as you were going through these is the importance of honor in both, actually in the first 3 plays, that we covered. And what that actually means, because you think about it, and especially in the terms of Antigone, between your loyalty between the individual and the community you mentioned, but also loyalty to your family as well. and those are your values, right? So if those are your values, then that's when you think about the idea of honor in and of itself. It includes things that you find to be most important, as well as they drive your ethics as well. So this is why Creon is actually doing what he's doing. He's doing what he the state. The same thing is, even though Othello is kind of falling for obviously a trap, but his ultimate decisions are based on honor as well, and he identifies with his position in a way. So there's elements of authenticity when we're talking about the idea of honor, and that's an important thing when we're talking about the depth of the characters and why they act the way they do. When I'm trying to think with Don Carlos, I'm trying to think of the overarching theme for that was basically it was just I don't know. It was pretty much, if I remember everything correctly, is the relationship between Don Carlos and Marquise.
Well, there were several threads there. I mean, just to help you out, just to jog, I know like it's been a while since we read it. So, there were several themes there. One is, of course, his illicit love for the queen. And, there was, again, a choice between his passion and what was considered correct, appropriate, etc. Then you have Marquise de Posa, who has sort of like an ideological stake to grind. And he uses his friendship with Don Carlos to achieve his own ends. And so he has essentially this kind of utopian view of society he wants to achieve, and he's willing to sacrifice everything to that, including the well-being of his friend, his best friend, essentially, and other people's lives, including his own. To be fair, we should say that. And then you have the King Philip II and the Grand Inquisitor, who are obviously willing to sacrifice people left and right for the sake of a stable society, a stable state and church that is able to control society in what they consider to be proper, I guess, guidelines and limitations. So that I would say those are kind of the main themes. Then you have this theme of, obviously, of conniving and betrayal by Princess Eboli, and other people there as well, who are, you have nobles who are obviously vying for power and trying to achieve status and power. They don't really care about anything else. So those
she felt badly at the end, though, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, they all probably felt badly when.
I guess if I'm drawing parallels, that could also be linked to the enemy of the state, where basically you'll do anything for the for the group of the people, including sacrifice the truth, or even just kill people in general. With King, when we're talking about Don Carlos, Joan of Arc was actually interesting. I don't recall if I were actually be able to attend that. But I had read that a long time ago as well. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a real play that where it's a female that's actually displaying an extraordinary amount of courage at a young age. And I just remember the opening scenes of that very clearly. And so and obviously in the Catholic Church, she's pretty much celebrated, even because she was considered burned as a witch. But and then the Cyrano de Bergerac, little bit of vanity, I guess I'd say would be the main thing in that entire play. So that was one of the interesting things. Overall, what the plays were, and again, it's hard to just come back and just summarize them just the way we are. But I think that the experience itself, I appreciate, one, reading it with people that are more well-versed in literature than myself, because I think as a group that it really helps when we go back and forth with certain concepts that maybe we had not considered. So I think I very much appreciate that. I appreciate the plays too, because they weren't overwhelming or too long. So it wasn't like we needed several sessions in order to go through them. We could actually go through them in a single session. So I thought that was very helpful. Not to say that we should avoid, plays that may take us a little longer. I think when we can kind of pick up with these meta narratives, it's helpful just for thinking in general, and I appreciated the effort everybody put in.
Thank you, Joe. That's helpful. Shrikant, do you want to add something?
Yeah. So I just love this. I love the plays. There's several things. Personally, I love the variety. I love the variety of the playwrights. These are clearly extremely creative people with very deep insights about human beings, relationships between human beings. They have very different styles. So it's amazing to see what they focus on, how they talk about it. The Greek style is very sparse and very bold. There are styles which are far more sophisticated, far more, the characters, the palette of characters across the plays is quite amazing. You get to see the portrayal of what is going on within the consciousnesses of these characters, how they're thinking, how they're feeling, how they're interacting with one another. So to be able to see so many different great artists present so many different characters in so many different styles, I think that by itself is a tremendous treat. And you start to see kind of patterns amongst them. Each of them is like a jewel. It's like you can spend a lot of time on each of the plays and each of the characters within the plays. And then when you start to put one against the other, start slowly comparing, lots of interesting things come up. I think the entire series, it's really about these very strong characters who are pursuing their values in challenging situations. And they're basically taking on a lot in their own way. The problems are different, the motivations are different. It's Saint Joan, it is Othello, it is Antigone, it is Cyrano. Each of them is very different from each other. But so just that, the kind of value pursuit of individuals in face of everything else, I think that was amazing. And I thought it was wonderful.
Thank you, Shrikant. I want to add a couple of things that came to me as I was listening to both Shrikant and Joe. So observation number one, half of the plays that we've read, or roughly half, are based, since we're at 7, are based on historical characters. The other half is not. Did you think any differently about the plays that are pure fiction versus the ones that are based on, have a prototype in history? That's a question / observation about them. And the second observation is, in the first play, in the Greek play by Sophocles, Antigone, we have an extra, I put it down as a character, the chorus. all the other plays do not have a chorus as a functional role, right? Do you think chorus is actually missing though in these other plays? As I thought about it a little bit more, I thought maybe the role of the chorus is taken by the secondary characters that are perhaps servants, perhaps not as, they're not in the forefront, but they serve as this kind of sounding board for what's happening. Particularly, I'm thinking of Emilia in Othello. She is the maidservant to Desdemona, and she is someone that Desdemona kind of bounces ideas off of and gets feedback as to what she is doing. Eventually, of course, she perishes with her mistress, but as the play develops, we kind of see her role as this kind of sanity check against what's happening. And it's almost like the chorus, right? The chorus is not really a participant, but yet it serves this role of kind of like either the conscience or almost like the subconscious level of the play. Not as strong, I would say, in Cyrano de Bergerac, the last one. In Saint Joan, you have some roles of servants, but they're not very prominent, and they're also in the beginning of the play. But definitely in Le Cid, definitely in Othello. In Don Carlos, I don't remember a whole lot of secondary roles that helped us illuminate, because pretty much all the main characters were in the focus. What do you guys think? I mean, just another thought, another observation, maybe a way to compare and contrast these plays. So that's just another thought. I shared the quick table that I put together, if you guys want to look at that to help you again jog your memory and also maybe stimulate some discussion or thoughts. If you want to share, just type an exclamation mark in the chat and I will call upon you. No pressure. Take your time. While you're thinking, I also want to... Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I'm just pulling up your list there that I think that might be as helpful. But the chorus question is actually an interesting one. And I had not thought of it from that perspective, but I did appreciate the chorus, the use of the chorus in Antigone. You really got a feeling. I think I felt like I got a better understanding of a Creon, just how arrogant he was, and how basically you have the chorus warning him, and he's still doing what he's doing. And yeah, and everybody else, it's in every other play, it's just a backdrop where it's characters. I guess it depends on taste. Either or is okay, obviously. But I didn't think about it until you just brought it up. But I do think that that's the use of a chorus is actually pretty interesting in general. Mm-hmm. That's just an initial comment. Anyway, your other question was, did you was that the main question?
The other question was, did you half the plays were based on historical prototypes and the other half?
That's right.
So did you feel that distinction as you went through it, or did it kind of all blend in and seem almost the same regardless of maybe the other way to phrase it is, were the portrayals realistic enough where that distinction was pretty much erased?
I think they were, actually. I do appreciate plays that about history more than I do fictional plays. But yeah, the selection was pretty interesting, that you can kind of the exception maybe of Cyrano de Bergerac. I would not include that, in the sense that I would, that kind of stood out. But the rest of them, yeah, actually they do. They kind of they blend in together to a certain degree, and it's very hard to make the distinctions what which ones are actually representative of history and which ones aren't. I mean, or just a kind of a story. So maybe that's why I like them so much. So
Thank you. Anyone else wants to share on this? While you're thinking, I also want to suggest what might be helpful, at least has been helpful for me, is to take two characters from two plays and try to compare and contrast them like that. So for instance, some of the pairs that I came up with that I thought were interesting was, for instance, comparing Desdemona and Joan of Arc. Not necessarily the obvious choice, but when you think about it, both of them were somewhat idealistic. Both of them did things out of principle and refused to compromise themselves in any way. And both of them suffer for it in the plays, right? Both Joan and Desdemona, and tragically. And in some ways, I think they're comparable. And I guess the question is there something about that naivete that actually gives them strength, but is also kind of the seed of their own demise? So that's one example of kind of juxtaposing these characters. The other one, of course, is Grand Inquisitor in Don Carlos versus Tiresias in Antigone. They both have this sort of a prophetic role. And when I say prophetic, not in a sense that they foretell the future, but in a sense that they are guiding the actions of the state. They're advisors to the king. And Tiresias gives a particular type of advice, and Grand Inquisitor gives another very specific type of advice to Philip II. So they're very comparable, parallel characters, and yet they perhaps deserve a different estimate of their character. So again, just I thought it was an interesting comparison to make. Any of you thought of any such comparisons or anything else? Any other feedback before we go to the next part of this?
I haven't thought of it.
Mike, go ahead. Mike hasn't. Go ahead, Mike.
Let Joe finish.
Okay, Joe, if you have, sorry.
No, I was basically going to say I'm trying to draw a comparison to Dr. Stockman, but I'm struggling with that one a little bit.
Who would fit him in the other plays?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I thought of Antigone as being kind of the his parallel.
Is that okay?
As kind of, again, a person who stands up against society for something they believe to be right. Antigone would be, to me, a good parallel, but there may be others.
I'll let Mike go.
Okay, all right. Mike, go ahead.
So the ones you've specified are interesting. I have a little trouble of remembering which ones you've covered and which one that were historical and which ones were not. However, in terms of Shakespeare, for example, the ones where he was constrained by historical facts, like the one with the Battle of Agincourt, had more reality and less flights of fancy. I don't believe Macbeth and Hamlet were based on real things, but they were based on they almost seemed real to me as I read them, but there was more flights of fancy. He had more freedom. Like there wasn't anything like the witches scene in the ones that were real, and that even though the witches scene to me seemed real, especially Mel Gibson's version of the witches scene seems real. I think he had more freedom when he was not constrained by historical, but he did a real good job, even though he I think he took the poetic license with facts, even in the ones that were based on reality. Romeo and Juliet, for example, I don't think was real, but it could have been real. It's more, but it was more like the Hatfields and McCoys, which and more how should you say, more timeless. I wish I could explain those things the way you explained the ones you picked, but that seems to be that's my impression of them.
Right. So just as a reminder, so the ones that were based on historical figures are Cyrano de Bergerac, obviously Saint Joan, Don Carlos, Le Cid, and that's it. All the others, Antigone, Othello, Enemy of the People, are based, in fiction. So I guess when you think about it that way, do you guys feel like when you're reading, let's say, Othello versus Don Carlos, are you getting a different sense that it's actually not a real character versus, I don't know, like, again, something that's based in reality, like Cyrano? I actually, when I read Cyrano personally, I feel like it's a made-up character much more so than any of the others, because he's so larger than life in a lot of ways. And he is obviously Edmond Rostand took some liberties with that character as well, and so he's not exactly like he wasn't in reality. But Mike, you seem to imply that when you're dealing with historical prototypes, the author is more constrained. I don't know that I agree with that completely. I feel like a lot of these guys, they really take a lot of license with their characters, like Schiller with Don Carlos, for instance, makes him out to be much more noble, I would say, and less crazy than he was in reality. I mean, when you read his descriptions and like from what we have in historical references, I mean, the guy was clearly suffering from some mental problems, and it kind of manifested itself, which is why he was not promoted. In the play, of course, it's all made out to be as this, his father is not really happy and doesn't favor him as much. So that creates this very real problem, which again, maybe it's realistic, right? A lot of times it does happen that way, that you have this conflict between parents, fathers, and sons. Anyone else wants to contribute to this discussion on different comparisons, similarities, what should gain your insights and so on? All right. Okay, so in that case, we will move on to the second part of our session tonight, which is what we wanted to do is kind of gauge the temperature in the room and see what you guys thought of our next steps and next selection of plays. So with that in mind, Shrikant and I put together a short poll that we want to discuss with you. And basically, I think I'm just going to share again the screen where I have the questions, and then we can pretty much go one by one. And I would ask you to, let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, so can you guys see this? Hopefully you can. Yeah, so we'll just go one by one. And what I would ask you to do is, as you read this, just type in the selection A, B, C, D, or whatever in the chat, and that way we can kind of gauge the the temp, like I said, the direction that we perhaps will follow in the next meetups. Now, this is obviously not something set in stone. We want to take your opinions into advisement, obviously, but we will, we want to satisfy the group today, and also kind of the larger audience, and what we think is going to be a good, good selection and so on. But with that said, if you were given a choice of which is the author you're most interested in reading and discussing in a group setting. So A, Sophocles, Euripides, Aeschylus, so kind of the Greek plays. B, Shakespeare. C, Lope de Vega, whom we have not really covered, but he's a great playwright, wrote a lot of different plays and perhaps deserves our attention. And then some of the modern playwrights that we've already covered, and one new one, Ibsen, Shaw, and Brecht. If you want to type in that selection in the chat, I would appreciate it, and then we'll kind of tally it up, and we'll go from there. So don't be shy. If you want your opinion to be taken into account, type in the selection for the first question. And also, if you have something to say about that, if you want to just express your opinion or preference, again, type an exclamation point in the chat, and we will, I'll be happy to call on you to discuss as well. Okay, thanks, Eleanor. Thanks, Joe. DLJ, thanks. Yeah, if you have a different choice as well that's not listed, obviously you feel free to include that. This is the advantage of having a live poll. We're not really constrained to the choices listed. You can type in whoever you want.
5 doesn't give the ABCDs, at least on my screen.
Yeah, we'll get to it in a second. I'll scroll it up, Mike, when we get to this one. So any additional thoughts on question number 1 before we move on to question number 2? Okay, so then we'll move on to question number 2, which is...
Sorry, regarding question number 1.
Yeah.
Do you want to, have you considered doing something which is just more recent?
Well, okay, that's a great question.
Because these guys all died 100 years ago, or no, except maybe Brecht, who probably lived until, served the East German state until the mid-60s. So, would it be fun to maybe throw in some options, recent American or British playwrights or something, Sarah Kane or something? No, I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you, Tad. That's a great question. When I originally proposed a reading list to Shrikant, I did include some of the more recent playwrights. And the thought originally was, well, we want to make sure that we are studying the ones that are firmly considered classics. And with the more modern writers, it's a little bit more of a matter of, I guess, either taste or opinion, because there's not been enough time to really weed them out. However, there's some that are, even if they're not necessarily everybody agrees on them being a classic writer or classic work, we can certainly look into it. So I do thank you for that comment, and I will definitely relay it to Shrikant as well, as it's an absolutely valid point. Do we want to, we want to include some of the more modern playwrights? There's some American, there's some European. Definitely we can.
I think the reasoning is quite sound in that you're only looking at something which is considered a classic. But I think but I think it's okay to deviate sometimes a little. It doesn't mean you can't stick with the core curriculum and, everything has to be radical, man. No, you can do a little bit of experimentation at the edges, no?
Absolutely. Great point. And I will certainly take that into account. And again, I am very much in favor of delving into modern arena. As perhaps some of you know, we've been discussing some of the more both modern and postmodern philosophers recently in our linguistic series. So yes, absolutely. That's a great point.
The other obvious issue is that if one only studies things which are, have been established in theatre, in the sort of theatre, one ends up really only looking at very, very limited number of cultures. So there's almost nothing outside sort of France, Germany. Yeah, you haven't even got Americans like Tennessee Williams in there. So it just becomes so culturally narrow. I know you've done pretty well within those constraints, I must admit. I was surprised to see the Schiller But I still think it could be a little bit more adventurous and find some young South African playwright who happens to be a woman or something like that, just for the hell of it, not because I have a particular agenda.
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So moving on. The next area is which play genre do you find most interesting, enjoyable for this series? I mean, it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, obviously. We probably want to do both, but I was curious just to get your opinion. What did you think? Did you enjoy the tragedies more than the comedies? Did you enjoy a little bit of both? Ernest says, "See, I tend to agree with that." DLJ agrees. Yeah. So yeah, obviously, yeah, that's kind of what I would expect. Although I have to say that tragedies a lot of times do tend to shock us more and have more of an emotional response, and they stick with us more because they kind of affect us, especially if we start identifying with the characters. But that's not to say we don't want to be stuck and depressed and reading about everybody dying in the end. So we do need a good comedy to be interspersed there now and then. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Okay, great. So we'll move on from this one. This is a pretty easy one. So this next question is about thematic focus. And, one way we can do this is to structure the plays around a common theme. So if we were to do that, would you be more interested in plays that are reflecting historical events? Would you be more interested in plays that focus more on interpersonal relationships, like, let's say, Othello or some other ones? Socio-philosophical commentary, that's a pretty broad one. And then social satire, again, there's some, obviously, these are not mutually exclusive, where you could have a little bit of both. But again, just curious what your thoughts are on that. In your responses, if you could include the question number, that way it's easier for me to read it later. That way I can kind of figure out what's going on. So if you type in like 3A, then I know it's your response to question number 3. Yep, perfect. Thank you so much. Yep, thank you. All right. And again, if anybody wants to respond to that, kind of the question being asked, and feel free to type an exclamation point, and then I can call on you to give you feedback. Thank you. All right, moving on. The way we've structured this in the past is we've done it bi-weekly. So as far as that goes, is this a good schedule? Is it too frequent? Is it too infrequent? Are you happy with that? Was that a good experience? Was it enough to keep you interested and kind of keep the momentum? If you want to just give us a quick feedback on that, would appreciate that. A, B, okay. Yeah, just so we kind of know where the maybe the preferences are. I know we have a smaller group. I was hoping we could disseminate this to a larger group because the sample size here is really small. Not really great for statistical analysis, but we'll see what we can do with this. Thank you, Joe. All right, so maybe we're doing once a month. Okay. And then finally, perfect, Tad, thank you. For number 5, kind of similar to number 3, but if we were to do sort of like an exploration, right? Would you want to explore, drill down into a particular theme? In other words, we could pick, let's say, envy as a theme and try to find plays that attack it from different angles. Or we could pick, state versus individual, kind of like Enemy of the People, and then again find plays that are similar in that they discuss this topic. So would you want to do like that? Would you want to do plays from a specific time period? We can look at, let's say, late 1800s as a time period and see all the plays that have been written in that time period, or early 1900s, or some other time period, and just see how that is reflected in the different plays across the globe. Same author, obviously, that's an easy choice. We could just look at Shakespeare, for instance, and do a Shakespeare series and pick some of the ones that, some of the more either known or lesser known Shakespearean plays that, or some other, like Lope de Vega obviously has a huge number of plays that we can select from. And then the choice D is kind of like what we've done before, which is a hodgepodge of different time periods, different authors, and different themes. And maybe that works best because, we kind of get a good sampling of them across the board. And yeah, just go from there. All right. Excellent. All right. So I think I'm going to stop sharing unless you need more time. And yeah, so this is, I think this is very helpful. So I'm going to take all of these responses, and then we'll, the way it works is, I'm going to discuss it with Shrikant. We might do another poll for kind of the group. So look out for maybe any links on the Meetup website, and then we'll try to come up with a good reading schedule, maybe starting in September, or mid-September by the latest, I would think. So hopefully we'll come up with a good series to continue on with this one. In general, though, if you have any thoughts, constructive criticism is fine. What could be better? How we can kind of keep the attention of the participants and keep the momentum, I think, is the main thing. One of the reasons we just decided to do this poll is because when we started out, we had a pretty good attendance, and it kind of dwindled towards the end. So it's not as much fun when, fewer people attend, as you can probably tell. So we want to make sure that we're addressing and the interests of a wider audience and keeping the momentum and so on. So this is very helpful, guys. Thank you for your responses. DLJ, controversial plays over time. Why? Okay, that's an interesting one. We'll have to, of course, how you define controversial is in itself interesting question. I think a lot.
Let's say scandalous, right? So why did Catholic Church ban them, or why did why were they banned by the Nazis, or whatever it was, right?
Right. No, that's a good one. Yeah, that's
pick every
a lot of
years,
the ones that we've read.
Actually, yeah, that would be an interesting approach, like, because you can go into the idea of why art was suppressed to begin with, and the impact that art has on, actually, I brought this up as a topic last night with a discussion group as a possibility, the impact that art and literature have on society in general. So I think that having a set of plays that were suspended, whatever reason, actually would be really interesting to explore a little bit more deeply.
I think that would be interesting because you could include people like Václav Havel, or suppressed Eastern European writers of the 1940s or 30s or 50s.
So maybe every 50 years there's going to be at least one, isn't there? So you can go back 500 years. No, go back to the Greeks. You can go all the way back, and every 100 years or so. God, that'll keep you going forever, wouldn't it?
Right. Well, that's definitely an interesting criteria. Something I definitely haven't thought about, but it is intriguing. So maybe I will look into it and see if we can come up with like a list that would be that will be both considered. Again, we want to stay with the classic canon for as much as possible, just because of it generates more interest versus something that's a little bit more out there on the fringe, and people tend to respond to well-known authors that are worth their time, right? So we don't want to read something that's just like an individual interest versus something that is a classic. But at the same time, it's like Tad mentioned, we need to be adventurous a little bit to some degree and include some of these maybe lesser known and more marginal or marginalized writers, authors that nevertheless have something to tell us.
I have a particular interest, which I'd be very happy to impose on everyone else, which is the surrealist playwrights like Ionesco and maybe Harold Pinter you could include in that, Cocteau, Beckett. But I don't know if that would, that would catch that net would catch anyone else's interest. So it's not for me to judge. Really.
Could you type in the names of these authors in the chat, just so that we're all kind of on the same page there? The ones that you, I know a couple of them, but some of the others I didn't know. So if you don't mind, and that way we have a record. And then, yeah, we'd definitely,
These are the ones that I would look at. Yeah. Ionesco is pretty much within the repertoire, actually, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. And again, anyone else, if you guys want to suggest specific authors or works that you want to read, this is the time to do it. We only have a few people here, so you're not going to be overshadowed by a lot of other folks. This is your chance to, if you want to read something specific. Ernest, do you have anything you wanted to suggest? I know you're an avid reader.
Anything is good. No, because it's all classics. You cannot say anything against Shakespeare or Sophocles or anybody else. They all, obviously, my favorite play is King Oedipus, but it's up to because every morning when I wake up, I think about King Oedipus and how lucky I am compared to him. So, but if you want to increase attendance, I would recommend to have it on weekdays because lots of people have families and Sunday is not the best day.
Okay, that's an interesting point. I'll bring it up as well. Yeah, this might be good. Yeah, to do on a weekday.
But it's up to the people, yeah, because it's people much more. Yes, exactly. Oedipus Rex, yes. But as again, there are lots of plays, and there's I believe on internet there's a list of 100 best plays, so you can pick. It will be easier to read because you don't remember some of them, like Misanthrope and stuff like that. But people have families, and it's better if you have it on a weekdays. They can put children to bed or something like that, and they can participate.
Right, got it. That's good. Yeah, part of the reason we did it on the weekends because StreetCon has so many other meetups during the week that this got pushed out to the weekend, which works for me, but may not work for some of the family folks, like you mentioned. Okay, this is great. Guys, thank you so much for participating in this. Joe, did you want to say anything else before we
do have one request? I mean, maybe avoid any too depressing, like Death of a Salesman.
Say again, sorry.
Like Death of a Salesman, I would rather. I'd rather skip that. Like meaning, like anything that's a little bit too depressing, I think.
Just a thought as well. There is the one-act play, which might be a nice format to look at.
Oh yeah,
because in that way you can get through a whole bunch of stuff in an hour, and it's kind of provides quite a nice conversation point because you can, it's like it speaks for itself really.
Yeah, we've, some of the ones we've done, I feel like most of the ones we've done, even though there were several acts, they were pretty short and easy read. Maybe that's just me. Again, I don't have, my kids are all grown up, so I don't have the screaming kids in the background. Maybe that makes it harder for folks with children to read a longer play.
Othello's a bit of a lump, isn't it?
Which one?
Othello is
Othello was one of the longer ones I think that we did. Yeah. I think it was 5 acts or something like that.
Right.
But most of the others were pretty short. I thought were pretty manageable. But yes, I will try to maybe err on the side of shorter versus longer, just to keep the, so we can dig into it more and make it more accessible to others. All right. Unless we have other comments or any other last words or wishes, I'm gonna wish you a good night. Thanks again for participating. And we'll let you know when we come up with a reading schedule, and this will be announced on the meetup as usual. And yeah, we'll continue going with this. So thanks again. It was a lot of fun for me to discuss the other 7 that we did. Hope you enjoyed it as well. All right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.